So I've had the Apple M1 Mac Studio for a couple of weeks now, and just before the video gets started, let me say this is not a video of me just complaining about Apple and the computer not working the way it's supposed to and things not being as easy as I wanted them to be. It's not that kind of video. I think the computer's awesome. It's a huge step up from my 2016 MacBook Pro that I was using. However, there were some issues whenever I migrated over from the Intel system to the Apple Silicon system. And I just want to let you guys know what those issues were and how I ultimately resolved those issues, so maybe you don't make the same mistakes moving forward. Let's go ahead and talk about the computer. So this is the 2022 Apple M1 Mac Studio computer with 32 gigs of RAM and the 512 gigabyte storage. This is the base model. I didn't do anything fancy. Like I said, I was using a 2016 MacBook Pro, so I knew anything that I bought was going to be a huge step up. And let me say, this thing is extremely fast. Everything is very fast, very snappy. Virtual instruments load really quickly. They run smoothly. There's pretty much no rendering time in Final Cut Pro. It does everything I could possibly want it to do and more. But like I said, there were some issues whenever I first started using the computer. So like anyone who has been using a really old computer and has been putting up with slow processing times and virtual instruments not loading and buffering issues and rendering issues, just all the issues that you can deal with a computer, as soon as I got the Mac Studio, I wanted to start using it pretty much immediately. So I brought it into the studio, did the whole migration assistant thing, and I think that's really where the heart of the issue lied for me. Like I said, I was using a 2016 Intel MacBook Pro, and I was migrating over to the new Apple Silicon system. And migrating over from the Intel system to the Apple Silicon system brought forth a ton of issues that made the computer pretty much unusable for the first few days I had it. Practically speaking, these issues really presented themselves in Logic. I never actually got to use Final Cut because I was never able to make any music, and I'm making primarily music on this YouTube channel, so I didn't really have any content to edit in Final Cut. So like I said, all of these issues, I'm referring to Logic. So I was working on a guitar cover and I programmed all the drums, and I was literally just about to start tracking guitar to program drums, and for some reason every time I would try to track, there was just an incredible amount of latency. I don't always use the low latency mode on Logic, but I've really never experienced anything like this. I was all the way down to 32 buffer size. There was realistically like a second latency from me playing to it recording in Logic. And there was really no latency issues whenever I was just playing on an amp sam, but if I went to record, then there was a huge amount of latency while I was recording, and then from that point forward, there was a ton of latency in the project. I could start a new project and it wouldn't be an issue anymore, but I was completely unable to record any guitar in Logic on 32 buffer size, literally as low as it goes. And after processing some of the MIDI drums, I was even unable to play the MIDI drums back. You know, I could bounce them down and I would have wave files of the kick, snare, etc., and that would play just fine, but triggering the MIDI in real time did not work in Logic either. There was huge buffering issues, just, you know, the snappy crackling, and then it just basically stops playing. It was a huge hindrance on my workflow because I'm recording pretty much just guitars to MIDI drums. So when my MIDI drums and my guitar doesn't work, there's really nothing I can do. It was so bad to the point, if I opened too many instances of some amp sims, Logic would just completely crash. And too many is literally like 5. I would do 4 or 5 instances of an amp sim and it would just crash. You would think it would be able to handle way more, so I knew there was some compatibility issues somewhere. So with all these issues and in my ignorance, I decided to just go ahead and update to the newest operating system. The computer came with Monterey installed. I upgraded to Ventura, updated Logic, updated Final Cut, and I was thinking, you know, maybe all these updates will fix the issues, but it may have even gotten worse. There were a ton of my plugins that were taking, I kid you not, 5 to 10 seconds to load. I could open an instance of the plugin and it would just be slightly grayed out in Logic, and then finally it would open up maybe 5 to 10 seconds later. And pretty much 95% of the time one of these plugins finally opened, it would negatively affect the overall performance of my computer in this particular project, making all of the issues I talked about earlier that much worse. So after putting up with these issues for a few days and realizing that updating the operating system, updating Logic wasn't fixing anything, I actually went to Apple support and found a thread where you could look on your computer and see what programs and what plugins, anything that's installed on your computer. You could see if it was optimized for Intel or if it was optimized for Apple Silicon. And this was dumb that it took me this long to figure out, seeing how I migrated from an Intel system. Pretty much everything that migrated over from my old MacBook to my new Apple Silicon computer was all optimized for Intel. There were very few that were universal and pretty much nothing that was optimized for Apple Silicon. So I finally decided, let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater and do a full factory restore. And just keep in mind that all of these issues happened over 4 to 5 days, really just anytime I could try to sit down and make some content in my studio, and it would just always lead to a huge amount of discouragement because the computer I just spent $2,000 on just wasn't working at all. So after I did the factory restore, it did take a while for me to reinstall all of my plugins, but I actually just used the opportunity to sift through plugins that were sitting on my system that I hadn't used for really months. When everything was said and done, I ended up reinstalling maybe like 40 to 50% of the plugins that I had on my old system, and everything I installed minus 1 or 2 amp sims has all been optimized for Apple Silicon. And at this point there are a few plugins that are running on Rosetta on my computer. However, that is the exception and that is not the rule, which it was beforehand. Pretty much my entire computer was running on Rosetta, and now anytime there's an issue, it's almost always because the plugin isn't completely up to date. So I can go to like any of the manufacturers, the plugin manufacturers central apps that they all have now, update the plugin, and it fixes the issue 95% of the time. So with all that being said, there are still some plugins that I really like that haven't been updated to be optimized with Apple Silicon yet, but at least now I know and I have the peace of mind that for the majority, my entire system is optimized to work with Apple Silicon, and any issues are almost always because of an update. And whenever those plugins I really do like are ready to be used with Apple Silicon, my system will be ready for them. All of this was really just a long-winded way to say, if you're like me and you are migrating from an Intel system to an Apple Silicon system, using Apple's migration assistant may not be the best thing for you to do. I know it's tempting because it's super easy. You just put the two computers beside one another and just let them do their thing, and then before you know it, you're supposed to be able to just use your computer. But if you're going from an Intel to Apple Silicon, it probably won't be that simple. And you may be more capable than me. You may be able to do that and go through all your plugins, uninstall your plugins, install the new Apple Silicon versions. But for me, it was just easier to do a completely clean install and to go through my plugins, get rid of the ones I'm not using, install the ones that I am using. Realize there are some that you're not going to pay an extra $130 for just so you can update them. Waves. All in all, I will say I spent a few days trying to get the migration assistant version of my computer to work, and it really only took one afternoon to get a completely fresh install to work. So if you're gonna buy a new Apple Silicon system, that would be my recommendation to you. However, if you know a better way to go about installing all of your plugins or to migrate over to your new system, if you know a better way of doing that than what I've done, please leave that down in the comments. I would love to see how some people are migrating their old systems to their new systems. I'm sure that could be very helpful for anyone involved. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do leave a like and a comment, and I will see you guys in the next video.